He was trying to win a boxing match. I was trying to kill that guy. And I wanted a second chance to get him. I'm a preacher, but I just moonlight as a boxer and a grill salesperson. That's what I do.
For decades, George Foreman praised Muhammad Ali as his greatest rival and dear friend. But in a shocking twist, Foreman has just confessed something so brutal and personal, it's left fans outraged. What really happened in that legendary ring in Zaire? Why is Foreman, after all these years, speaking in ways that sound more like revenge than respect? Are we witnessing a crack in the legend? Is this Foreman rewriting history? Or finally telling the truth? From bitter defeats to brotherly love, this isn't just a boxing story. It's a story of rivalry, redemption, and a confession that has shaken fans to their core. We'll unpack the iconic fight, the controversies, the friendship, and the bombshell that has everyone talking. The fight that changed everything. October 30th, 1974. The air in Kinshasa, Zaire, was electric. Over 60,000 fans packed the Stade du 20 Mai, chanting, Ali, Bomaye, Ali, slay him. George Foreman, the undefeated powerhouse, was about to defend his heavyweight crown against a man many believed was past his prime, Muhammad Ali. The stage was set for what would become one of the most iconic fights in boxing history, the Rumble in the Jungle. Foreman entered the ring as the clear favorite. At just 25 years old, he was a wrecking ball. He had obliterated both Joe Frazier and Ken Norton, two men who had each handed Ali tough losses. The numbers told a brutal story. Foreman had knocked out 37 of his 40 opponents. Ali, on the other hand, was 32, slower. He had taken a beating in recent years, and many doubted whether his body could endure Foreman's power. Some feared for his life. But as always, Muhammad Ali defied expectations. From round one onward, Ali had been nothing less than a shock for everybody. He lay back on the ropes, tempting Foreman to attack. Foreman delivered a largely one-sided battering, blow after blow. To all onlookers, it seemed almost like taking one's own life. Ali would neither block nor avoid such punishment. At ringside, people were horrified. Is he crazy? Some reporters wondered. But the apparent madness was sheer genius. The single aim of Ali's rope-a-dope was to tire out the younger, stronger Foreman. The champion was used to stopping fights very early. Few opponents had ever taken him beyond the third round. But Ali was different. He would whisper insults during the fight, taunting Foreman while absorbing punishment. Gradually, however, the unthinkable had started to take place. George Foreman was beginning to slow down. By round 5, the punches didn't have the same thud anymore. Round 7 found Foreman's chest heaving. Ali, on the other hand, stayed stoic, calm, calculated. He took the storm and was ready for payback. Then came round 8. In the middle of the round, Ali sprang off the ropes. It must have been a sight to behold. The speed at which he came off the ropes must have stunned Foreman as much as it did the crowd. A combination that couldn't have been any quicker sent Foreman reeling. A right hand to the jaw was followed by a blinding flurry to the head. Foreman staggered, arms down, dazed. The next hook landed, and down went the giant. He fell backward onto the canvas like a sack of potatoes with a thud that was heard around the stadium. The referee began the count. Foreman got up, trying, but he couldn't make it. The world, with disbelief, watched the once unbeaten being beaten. Muhammad Ali had done the impossible. The moment of Foreman flat on his back, and Ali with both fists high above his head, is forever etched in history. Ali didn't just win back the heavyweight title, he won back his legend. For Foreman, it was the first real loss in his career. And where the cameras were flashing on Ali's victory, the man on the mat was commencing on the aptly titled longest match of his life, the war inside his own mind. For Foreman, what happened in that ring was not just a defeat. It was a rift in his identity. He had thought he was invincible. That thought had been shattered. And the world would soon find out just how deep that scarring really runs in the story of George Foreman. What came next wasn't just about boxing gloves and bruises. It was about doubt, bitterness, and the kind of loss that changes a man forever. Foreman's private battle with defeat. In the moments after George Foreman hit the canvas in Zaire, the world celebrated Muhammad Ali's victory. But for Foreman, those moments would echo for decades. What fans didn't see, what wasn't captured on camera, was the quiet war that raged inside him long after the lights went down. The real fight had only just begun, and this time, there was no referee, no crowd, and no bell to save him. To the public, Foreman was the picture of brute strength, a destroyer whose fists told his story. But after the rumble in the jungle, that image began to crack. Foreman didn't just lose a fight. He lost control of the narrative that had defined him. For years, he had been the unstoppable force. Now, he was the man who fell, outsmarted and outlasted by the very opponent he believed he'd crush. Privately, the defeat consumed him. Foreman became obsessed with the details of the fight. He questioned everything. The unusually soft canvas. Was it rigged to neutralize his power? The referee's count. Was it too fast? The altitude, the humidity, the psychological warfare. Was it all orchestrated against him? In interviews years later, he would admit that he couldn't let it go. "I wasn't knocked out," he said. "I was exhausted, but I believed if I'd had just a few more seconds, I could have gotten back up." That "if" would haunt him for years. The rancor had taken root. Not just the result was questioned. The question was whether that result had been manipulated in some way. Foreman thought for sure something sinister had gone down in Zaire. He began seeing conspiracy signs all over the world with too much suspicion. And the epicenter was Muhammad Ali, the one man who had defeated him in every sense of the word, physically, psychologically, and spiritually. Foreman's public persona turned black. The charming destroyer was gone. Brooding and frustrated were all that remained. Foreman withdrew from the sport. For a while, he wanted nothing to do with boxing. He supposedly tried to leave it behind, but the shadow of that loss was everywhere. The press won't allow him to forget. The fans never stopped asking about it. And Foreman himself couldn't escape from that horrid thing he kept seeing on a mental romp replaying in his mind over and over again. The woe within was deeper. Now Foreman admitted that after the fight, he thought he was alone. "I went from being feared to being forgotten," he said. The world that once cheered his every knockout now doubted his legacy. His self-image, once the tank was made good, had shattered. At this very moment, out of sheer desperation, grace came. In 1977, after having lost to Jimmy Young in Puerto Rico, Foreman underwent what he called a near-death experience. Alone in his dressing room, he fell to his knees, crying out to God. That was a moment of surrender, not to the defeat in the ring, but to the defeat he had been running from within himself. From that day, everything was different for Foreman. He walked away from boxing, became a preacher, and dedicated his life to faith, family, and healing. While building his spirit, however, the scars of Ali's victory never fully faded. Again and again, Foreman would go back to that loss, sometimes in anger and sometimes in humility. "I was beaten," he would later say, "but I wasn't broken. That fight taught me who I really was." He saw the irony. The worst night of his career would become the turning point of his life. Still, the road to peace remained slow, and Foreman, before attempting to put it all behind him, had to face the man who had changed everything, the one opponent he never stopped thinking about. What happened when Foreman finally looked Ali in the eyes again would stun even his most loyal fans. A fight surrounded by controversy. The rumble in the jungle was more than just a boxing match. It was a global spectacle, a cultural event, and, for many, a moment of redemption and pride. But beneath the surface of that October night in 1974, lay a complex web of unanswered questions, suspicions, and ongoing disputes. While Muhammad Ali was crowned the victor, George Foreman left Zaire convinced the fight wasn't entirely fair, and he wasn't alone. From the very start, the conditions leading up to the bout raised eyebrows. Foreman, known for his ability to generate terrifying knockout power through solid footwork and planted punches, found himself fighting on an unfamiliar surface. The ring canvas, he would later reveal, was unusually soft. So soft, in fact, that it felt like walking on foam. It was like trying to box in quicksand, Foreman said. I couldn't set my feet. I couldn't drive my punches. For a man whose entire style relied on leverage, this change was devastating. It was not simply a petty annoyance. It was not only a setback at the level of strategy. Some have theorized that this was actually the doing of Ali's camp or his local sympathizers. True or false, the result was very evident. Foreman's legendary power became neutralized, and his self-confidence seemed to crash very quickly after that. Immediately after came counting. In the 8th round, after taking Ali's infamous combination, he fell down. Referee Zach Clayton began the 10 count. Foreman would claim it was unnaturally fast, but not before telling of how long that 10 was. I was really dazed, all right, but I wasn't out cold, he insisted. If I'd had just a second or two more, I could have stood up. Video analysts have done their work to determine the validity of the judge's ruling on this unfortunate incident. Did the count measure up? Did the referee rush it? Some say it was perfectly timed. Others believe it robbed Foreman of a shot at redemption. Boxing purists would argue that exhausted fighters always run for cover when something goes wrong. Blame it on the count. But in Foreman's case, it was different. It was more a matter of pride. It was a personal obsession for him. He has replayed that moment in his mind over and over for years. That count took something from me, he once said, and I couldn't stop chasing it. The emotional tortures had to do with the psychological war that Ali waged before the first toll of the bell. He made an insult of the slow, dumb, and predictable Foreman. Ali did not even stop at insulting Foreman. He underscored him. I had been feared by everyone I faced, said Foreman. Then here comes Ali, laughing in my face. The media laughed too, and the fans continued into the narrative. The brute was Foreman, the clever underdog, Ali. And the mind games worked, perhaps, too well. Then there were the crowds. As the fight was held in Africa, Foreman expected nothing but admiration. But what he got instead was a chorus chanting, Ali Bomaye, Ali, slay him. There was an electric atmosphere in the arena. However, it was against Foreman. I wasn't only fighting Ali, he would say many years later. I was fighting a stadium full of people who hated me. That psychological weight was heavier than any punch. The tumult created by the soft ring, the abominable crowd, the supposed fast count, and Ali's immaculate mind games came together to create a perfect storm that Foreman could not weather. And while Ali was justly showered with accolades for what was undoubtedly the most legendary show of sportsmanship of all time, the other side, Foreman's story, faded quietly under the cheer of who. To this day, the Jungle Rumble is one of the most debatable fights in boxing history, but rather because the whole story is incredibly layered with nuance, manipulation, and various unfortunate what-ifs refusing to give way. And as Foreman would soon reveal, it wasn't just the outcome that haunted him, but what he had gone into that ring intending to do. The crowd that broke Foreman. In the arena of combat sports, the energy of a crowd can either uplift a fighter or unravel them. For George Foreman, during the legendary 1974 Rumble in the Jungle, it was the latter. The very people he thought would cheer him on ended up playing a role in one of the most unexpected and devastating defeats in heavyweight boxing history. This wasn't just a fight between two men. It became a cultural reckoning, and Foreman found himself cast in a role he never anticipated, the villain. Foreman arrived in Kinshasa, Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of the Congo, as the undefeated heavyweight champion of the world. He had obliterated his previous opponents, Joe Frazier and Ken Norton, men who had previously given Muhammad Ali hell in the ring. Foreman assumed his dominance would speak for itself, and that the people of Africa, seeing a strong black champion from the United States, would welcome him with open arms. But he got it wrong. As far as Ali was concerned, the fight was not only in the ring, it was being fought in the hearts of men. He had long styled himself as the people's champion, but in Zaire, he became this. He walked the streets, visited local villages, danced, laughed, and spoke in ways to the press that extolled African heritage. His presence was felt far from the gym. He understood the people's emotional landscape and so deftly played to it. And so the magic began. There arose a great chant in Zaire, Ali, Bomaye, Alu, Bomaye. The translation, Ali, slay him. That was a war cry, a primal scream, an act of cultural allegiance. From Foreman's perspective, it generated a psychological warfare spirit. He was at war not only with Ali, but now with tens of thousands of fans demanding that he fall out of the ring. Later, Foreman admitted that he was shaken. He described stepping into the ring that night as completely alone. No love, no connection, just cold stares and chants begging for his defeat. That kind of psychological pressure is not theoretical. It is really invading a fighter's mind, worming into their focus, and chipping away at their confidence. Every cheer for Ali was a signal that Foreman didn't belong, that he was the outsider in a fight he assumed would be his crowning moment. Years later, he said, "I thought I was the hero, but that night, I realized I was the monster in someone else's story." The irony haunts. Foreman, a black man returning to the African continent, demanded his reverence. That was why, for the crowd, Ali was not just a boxer. He was a symbol of rebellion, resistance, charisma, and pride. Ali had made them feel respected. Foreman hadn't. The emotional rift generated an outcome inside the ring. Foreman fought hard, desperate perhaps. He swung and missed. He was annoyed. He was slowed. The roaring cacophony that dictated his demise punctured his mind, diminishing its winning aura of psychological intimidation. Ali thrived on this power. He grinned through the rounds. He chatted with Foreman in clinches. He leaned on the ropes and let Foreman tire himself as he waited. Then, when his time was ripe, Ali struck in the 8th round, dropping Foreman with surgical precision and out. But it was not only Ali's fists that dropped him, it was the choking recognition that he had lost something more than just a fight. He had lost the crowd, the support, and the position of champion in the people's eyes. As Foreman later reflected, "For the first time in my life, I felt like the villain." The feeling did not wear off quickly. For years, it would stay with him and define his identity after the fight, overshadowing his strong reign leading up to Zaire. But if Foreman thought the world had turned against him that night, it was nothing compared to what he would one day reveal about his own mindset. The confession that shook fans. For decades, George Foreman was widely respected not only as a 2-time heavyweight champion, but also as a figure of resilience, redemption, and class. His rivalry with Muhammad Ali, particularly their clash in the Rumble in the Jungle, was always discussed with a degree of reverence. Foreman had spoken graciously of Ali over the years, often calling him one of the greatest minds in boxing history. But then, seemingly out of nowhere, Foreman made a revelation so jarring it left fans stunned, and in some cases, furious. In a candid interview years after the fight, Foreman admitted something he'd never shared so directly before. He entered the ring in Zaire not just to win, but to destroy Muhammad Ali. His exact words? "I wanted to hit him so hard that he would never get up again." To many listeners, that wasn't just fight talk. It sounded brutal, excessive. It didn't come off as a champion determined to win. It came off as a man consumed by aggression. Some even interpreted his statement as Foreman admitting that, in the moment, he wanted to end Ali's career. Maybe more. Outrage met the former heavyweight boxer. The fans' comments on social networks and radio talk shows lent credence to disbelief and skepticism. Why must he say this now? Some wondered. After all of the years of respect and friendship, just how could you say something like that? Even Ali had reconciled with Foreman by then and had become one of his closest friends. This bold statement reportedly took him aback. Although the rivalry came to exist between them on a very different level than that of boxing, Foreman's remarks gouged fresh wounds for some people, bringing forth the realization of just how deadly serious the stakes were that night. But it was not about to die down. According to Foreman, nothing could be further from the intention. "I didn't want to slay him," declared Foreman. "What I meant was that I wanted to hurt him so badly in that ring, he would never come back again. I was young. I was drunk with my own power. I thought I was unstoppable." It was a backtrack, but it does nothing to erase the bluntness of his original comment. To fans who perceived George Foreman as the polite elder statesman of boxing, this glimpse into the mindset of his youth suggested a betrayal. It recalled that this man, who turned into a much-loved grill pitchman and preacher, had once marched into the ring with far darker intentions in his heart. But there was something so real about the confession that it couldn't help but make you uncomfortable. Foreman wasn't trying to glamorize that past mindset. He was trying to strip it naked. He was stripping away the layers of time and redemption to reveal the raw, unvarnished ambition that drove him as a young champion. Ugly, shocking, honest. That one honest moment forced fans to reckon with the kind of person Foreman had been and what kind of metamorphosis he had undergone. For all the outrage surrounding that statement, it stood in stark contrast to the man he would end up becoming. Foreman said what he did not for the sake of boasting. If anything, he was confessing because he was no longer burdened by that rage. In subsequent interviews, he even commended the end of the fight. "Had I won that night, who knows what sort of man I would have been," he had said. "But because I lost, I became a better man." How many have contemplated their rise to greatness? Boxers, of all people, realize that it should be all about invincibility and bravado. To some extent, that was Foreman's way of saying that the young champion who entered the ring in 1974 had not become the man who would later be adored as a sports icon. First, he had to lose. Only then would he be forced to deal with his own ego, bitterness, and all the other demons. This revelation that shocked fans also revealed something human about the transformation of the fighter, not just in the ring, but in life. It sounded like rage, but beneath the surface, it revealed something deeper, an unfiltered glimpse into the dangerous mindset of a man who had once believed he was unstoppable, from rivals to brothers. When George Foreman fell to the canvas in Zaire in 1974, it marked more than the end of a fight. It was the collapse of one man's myth of invincibility and the rise of another's legend. In that moment, Foreman and Muhammad Ali appeared to be eternal opposites, the bruising powerhouse brought down by the cunning tactician. But as years unfolded, something unexpected happened. What began as a bitter, painful rivalry slowly transformed into one of the most profound friendships in sports history. At first, the bitterness lingered. Foreman couldn't let go of the humiliation. He avoided watching footage of the fight. He questioned the referee's count. He blamed the softness of the canvas and even the heat in Zaire. These weren't just excuses. They were symptoms of a man trying to make sense of a devastating loss. The world had watched him fall. And for a long time, he wasn't just defeated in the ring, he was defeated in spirit. Ali, meanwhile, continued his reign as the people's champion, but he didn't gloat endlessly. He had played his role, the taunting, the theatrics. But when the bell rang for the final time that night, even Ali must have sensed that Foreman wasn't just a rival. He was something more complicated. It took years for the melting of the ice to begin. In an exceptionally candid moment, the recalled central incident of Foreman wasn't seen on cam or in the glare of a press conference, but rather at his ranch in a quiet conversation with a journalist who posed the question, "What happened in Africa?" For the first time, the politician did not take refuge in alibis. He simply said, "I lost. He beat me." That admission opened up a crack. Foreman now began to see the fight less in terms of his own personal failure and more as a significant event in his life, an event that humbled him, changed him, and finally set him free. He stopped running from it and began to think about it. And with that change came a change of heart about Ali. Once shameful, it slowly metamorphosed into admiration. Foreman began to admire Ali's brilliant rope-a-dope, the psychological warfare, and the pre-fight trash talk. What had seemed cruel suddenly was pure genius. "He didn't just beat me with his fists," Foreman said. "He beat me with his mind." Initially, the camaraderie blossomed in the tiniest and gentlest of gestures, shared interviews, thoughtful references. Over the years, they accumulate. One thing hasn't changed, though. When Ali's withering condition was due to Parkinson's disease, Foreman never left his side, neither in public nor private. Among many of the personal examples, the 1996 Academy Awards stood out the tallest. When We Were Kings, the documentary on their epic fight, won the Oscar. Ali walked slowly, weak from his illness, about to climb the stairs. Foreman did not even hesitate and reached out with his arm to help him go up the stairs. The same man who tried to knock Ali has now lifted him up before the world. It was simply not an iconic moment. It was very personal as well. As far as Foreman was concerned, he helped Ali in an act of grace, respect, and reconciliation. It illustrated how far they had come over the years. They were no longer fighters, they were brothers. But the love between them didn't erase the scars. It made them matter even more. And it reshaped Foreman's legacy in a way no win ever could. The legacy of a conflicted champion. George Foreman's career didn't end in Zaire. In fact, some might argue that it only truly began after that crushing defeat. His legacy, however, would forever carry the weight of contradiction. A man once feared as an unstoppable force, later admired for his humility, humor, and second-act transformation. But the shadow of Muhammad Ali and everything that the fight represented never left him. As the years passed, Foreman's identity as a conflicted champion became not just a personal truth, but a central piece of boxing history. In the immediate aftermath of the rumble in the jungle, Foreman was consumed by resentment. He felt cheated by the ring conditions, by the referee's count, by the crowd's unexpected hatred, and perhaps most deeply, by his own inability to live up to the myth he had built around himself. He had walked into that ring expecting to destroy Ali, to end the legend and solidify his dominance. Instead, he was the one left broken, physically exhausted, emotionally wrecked, and mentally stunned. Years passed, and Foreman chased redemption. He chased a rematch that never happened, living with a growing public persona more sinister than the last, distant, angry, and unpredictable. Fans who once adored his brawny strength began to turn their heads. He was beaten, certainly, but more than a beaten man. He was lost in the fog of his own bitterness. This descent was not the closing of a chapter in his story. It was, rather, the crucible that would redefine it. This led to one of the most astonishing reinventions in sports history. In the 1980s, Foreman underwent a major personal metamorphosis. Following a brush with death after a fight in Puerto Rico, he claimed to have found faith and a new sense of purpose. He walked away from boxing, transitioned into the role of preacher, and began the reconstruction of his life. Not merely as a man of God, but someone who had finally come to terms with his past. His return to the ring in 1987 wasn't just a simple comeback. The infamous boxing narrative had been rewritten. No longer was there the scowling destroyer. Rather, standing before all was the smiling, charming giant who cracked self-deprecating jokes and flipped the occasional burger in commercials. This version of George Foreman utterly captivated the fans. Anyone on the earth could see he was not a scary dude. Instead, he was interested in establishing rapport. He wanted to be approachable, even lovable, like your funny uncle who just happened to punch like a freight train. And that mix of power and warmth made him impossible not to root for. It was the kind of reinvention that didn't just revive his career, it redefined it. So, what do you think of Foreman's confession? Was it a brutal truth or a step too far? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more incredible stories from the world of sports. And while you're here, go ahead and click on the next video on your screen. You don't want to miss this.